Today we're going to be drawing a lighthouse in 1-point perspective, though it's kind of 3-point perspective. We're going to be adding some cool environmental factors to make it look like it's on a moody ocean. It's going to take you about 20 minutes. I'm so excited to draw with you. Let's hop right in. We're going to start off with drawing a horizon line. And we want the lighthouse to be kind of in the middle of our page, and so we're going to draw the horizon line in the middle too. And remember, the horizon line is like eye level. So in this drawing, we're going to be kind of looking out to sea as if we're on eye level with the lighthouse itself, meaning the lighthouse kind of appears to us like it would if we were walking on the rocky shore. We then add a vanishing point off to the right-hand side of our horizon line. The vanishing point is where the horizontal lines of our building appear to converge. And we're going to start off with creating a simple kind of structure for our lighthouse that makes it easier to draw the cylinder. Cylinders are a trickier shape to draw than a square. So we start off with a square and we kind of chisel our lighthouse shape into the cylinder. To do that, we're going to draw a triangle to create some guidelines for us. If you have followed my other drawing tutorials, you know I love this method of freehand perspective, creating guidelines that we can then erase. Once we have our triangle set up, we want to draw some vertical sides for our lighthouse. We're going to do that by drawing lines that kind of slant slightly outwards. We know that lighthouses are thinner at the top than they are at the bottom. We're going to kind of replicate that shape here using our triangle as a guide for the length of these lines. We then want to draw a line in the middle of these two vertical lines. This is going to help us kind of create that circular shape. So I'm dotting in here the middle of these lines, and then I'm going to kind of connect that back to the vanishing point. You don't have to draw it all the way there, but it's creating that sort of guideline. Once I connect these lines, you see how we're creating kind of the structure for the top of our lighthouse. We've used the vanishing point to create a square that kind of tapers off at the top, a little bit wider at the bottom. We don't need to draw the back of the square because that's going to be invisible behind the lighthouse, but now we have 3 points that we can then round off to create that circular kind of style of the lighthouse. This is great for using pencil because we can really just kind of soften the square, creating some arcs at the top and at the bottom. We now have a lighthouse that appears to be kind of going up into the sky, tapering off at the top, and down here it's a little bit wider, a little bit thicker. You know, often lighthouses have that top kind of ledge that has the top of the lighthouse, the actual light on it, and it's very important to add that light because without it we just have a tower. I guess we don't have a lighthouse at all. And we're going to do the same thing, creating that structure using the vanishing point. So the top line here, if we do it all the way down, would head towards that vanishing point. And the bottom line goes towards that vanishing point as well. The bottom of our structure is visible to us because we're underneath it. It appears like this lighthouse is above us. If we could leave it as a square, or if you want, you can kind of chisel out a circular shape here, making sure that your circle kind of hits each side of the square as it goes around the tower. We can then add the actual lighthouse itself, that top lighthouse part. This time I'm not even going to use our square method here. I'm just going to kind of estimate the top line of the lighthouse. And then I can start to add some details, some vertical lines here. We can add some details later, but for now, let's add some stripes here down the side of the lighthouse. We know that the horizon line is here, so that means the stripes that go up the lighthouse are going to appear to be curved upwards above the horizon line and downwards below the horizon line. It's easy to start with just mirroring that bottom line. As we go up the horizon line, this line is going to be a little bit shallower because it's right below the horizon line. it appears like it's arcing away from us. But then above the horizon line, these lines are going to appear to arc upward. This is a really great practice for kind of getting the feel of drawing these stripes freehand. This might not be intuitive. It might seem a little challenging at first, but it's a really kind of low stakes method of seeing how these rings and how these circles appear when they're above the viewer and below the viewer. And again, that's separated by the horizon line. Everything below the horizon line is going to appear to be below us. Everything above the horizon line is going to appear to be above us. We can then kind of hatch in these stripes. And we'll add some further details right at the end of this class. For now, let's think about what might be around this lighthouse. And I know lighthouses often are on platforms. They're built on rocky shores, and so these platforms are really critical for keeping them safe from the water and the rocks around it. Now, I do this in freehand, but you can use the same method we talked about, using the vantage point as a guide, creating a nice little platform for the lighthouse, and then adding some rocks. You want to kind of contrast that lighthouse shape with rocks that kind of cascade away from it. Now remember, the water down here is going to appear to be below us in the ocean. And so some of the horizontal sides of these rocks, I'm going to kind of have pointing up to that horizon line. I like adding some rocks here in the more abrupt foreground too. Maybe we make this this scene look a little bit more dangerous. And then we have a nice little lighthouse in the middle of a rocky shore here. I think it's looking pretty good. What we want to do now is add some shading and some water details, as well as the light of the lighthouse itself. Often, the vertical sides of rocks are going to appear a little bit darker than the tops. So you can see how I'm doing this by adding some shading. I'm using a 2B pencil here, which kind of gives me a nice, easy, dark shading ability. But whatever you have is fine. Adding some short vertical lines to kind of create dimension, make these rocks appear three-dimensional. I'm just shading the sides of them and creating more abrupt lines between the shadow and the highlights. Since the rocks here are going to be kind of more jagged, they would have more abrupt lines between the shadows and the highlights because, unlike the cylinder of the lighthouse itself, these rocks are kind of abruptly up and down. Speaking of the cylinder, we can add some shading on the lighthouse. You know, if it's a sunny day here with the sun coming down from the top, that means that some of this lighthouse will be in shadow. If the sun's right here, say, we know that it's casting its rays downward right onto this face of the lighthouse. That means that this side will be slightly in shadow, and the platform itself that we drew will be casting a shadow on the lighthouse itself. So we could say that the shadow is a little bit like this, right? The platform is blocking some of the rays from hitting the top of it. The rest of the rays of the sun are going to hit this part of the lighthouse. That means we can add some shading here, or on the top of the lighthouse, and then on this left-hand side. Unlike the rocks, however, we want the shading to get gradually lighter because the lighthouse is a cylinder. It doesn't have kind of sharp or abrupt curves. We can then add that shading down here on the rock, or on the platform as well, because we know the sun is kind of casting a shadow down this way. That means that some of these rocks might be a little bit more in shadow as well. It's fun to play with the kind of the density and darkness of shadows as well to add emphasis and more dimension to some of the shapes you're drawing. Do the same here on these rocks down here. You can imagine when you're thinking about these rocks, we're not drawing lines on them as per se, as we've done in other classes. Instead, we're just thinking where the shadows are and focusing on those shadows in order to add highlights to the light part of the rocks. Let's add a nice little point on the top of this lighthouse here. This is a pretty abrupt angle. We've almost created a 3-point perspective scene, right? Because these lines here on the left-hand side appear to be going back to another horizon line back there. However, when I think of lighthouses, I think of stormy waters. I think of like a nice storm with waves crashing up onto the lighthouse itself, like Robert Eggers' 2019 movie, The Lighthouse. Crazy storms, wild times. I think that's what we want to create here as well. So we can start with adding some clouds to kind of create more energy and dimension in this scene. This cloud, of course, is going to be above the horizon line here. I'm going to shade in the left-hand side of some of these billowing parts of the cloud because the sun, remember, is coming from up in this direction here. And why don't we see what it's like to shade in the bottom side of the cloud as well? This might not work, it might not look that good, but why don't we see what happens? We kind of experiment with making this cloud a little bit more three-dimensional. Some pretty light shading here. You can experiment with adding more clouds up in the sky as well. We know that the sea is going to be casting waves here on the lighthouse. So let's start with kind of creating some swells. How we start to do that is just adding some waves around the bottom of our rocks. Right now the bottom of the rocks are flat, but the waves would be creating swells and valleys that kind of would curl around the waves. You'll see how some of the rock below is visible, and then the water kind of comes up around the rock. That's going to be really useful here for us, creating more energy and dimension in the waves. You see here, I'm kind of creating a kind of feathered, curled line up around this rock with some spray that's kind of coming up onto the rock itself, only with just a few lines. And often it's tempting to kind of overshade scenes like this, but with just a few lines and leaving some white space, we can really create the illusion of waves that might be kind of hitting the lighthouse here with some spray, leaving the top of the waves white, and then kind of shading around the back of them. So you see how I created that vertical motion here upwards around the rocks, and then creating some horizontal movement here back towards the horizon line with really light, scratchy, loose lines. And let's try the same thing here in the foreground. So if I draw a wave up here with some white spray, I'm going to need to erase some of the rock texture that we've drawn. And then I can kind of create more wavy shapes here down in the foreground. And you can see how I'm just creating those valleys and the dips, the peaks and the valleys, I mean, without much shading. getting a little bit more detailed as they come towards us. Often we perceive some of the water here to be a little bit darker than other parts as the light hits it on different angles. You'll see that even the water might appear dark in real life, bluey and green. Since we're not working with color, we want to make sure it kind of contrasts the rocks a little bit. That might mean adding some shading even in the highlighted areas of the rock in order to make it appear like the water is kind of contrasting it. The water is a separate thing than the rocks. We're shading in the highlighted parts of our rocks, and this is a normal part of drawing. We're kind of going over what we've done already to add changes, highlight different things, add more emphasis. And even though we've shaded in those highlighted areas, we can then just add more shadow, more darkness in the parts of the rocks that we've drawn. Shading it in even darker here, with more ocean spray, more waves. I love how this scene is appearing a little bit moody now. I'm even going to shade in some of the sky here in the background. Why don't you even try shading in some of the water around the waves here. I'm on a roll. I think this drawing is looking good. I hope you're enjoying the drawing process. You'll see how by shading in some of the sky here and also shading in some of the water around the tower, we've effectively highlighted more of this lighthouse. We still have some sunbeams coming through here, but the lighthouse itself is looking a little bit moody. Why don't we even highlight the lighthouse a little bit more by creating some actual sunbeams kind of coming down. If we think about it, the sun's from up here, and maybe it's peeking through the clouds. Maybe there's some shadows here on these clouds up here as the sun comes through, creating that beam of light that's kind of coming down on the lighthouse itself. You'll see how this drawing is a little bit messy. It's a little bit rowdy, but there's a lot of energy going on. And I think we're capturing the lighthouse fairly well here. If you want, you can kind of go back over this with an eraser. Erase some of your lines or smooth up certain parts of this drawing. Add more details as you see fit. I think it'd be cool to add like a little door here on the lighthouse. I can imagine there's a little lighthouse keeper in there, hopefully staying warm and safe. And maybe some windows here as well. In this kind of scene, the central focal point can get a little bit lost when we add a lot of shading. And so sometimes it can be really effective to kind of highlight or darken in some of the main, more important lines, especially when we want to contrast the waves that are splashing up here against the side of the lighthouse. I am so excited to see what your lighthouse looks like. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Make sure you tag me on Instagram, TikTok, wherever you are, or even shoot me an email. Let me know what you've drawn today. Love to see it. And if it's helpful, remember to subscribe or leave a comment. Let me know how you liked this tutorial and let me know what I should draw next. I'd love to continue drawing with you. Before you finish, make sure you add in some more shadow, some more highlights. Think about other details you can add to your drawing to create a more kind of moody scene. I'm pretty happy with our sketch so far. But remember, this is a fun, low stakes drawing exercise, and you might not even be happy with what you've drawn. That is all right. The point is that you picked up a pencil today and spent 20 minutes drawing. And I think that is a win in itself. So give yourself a pat on the back. I'd love to see you in my next drawing class, and I hope you keep sketching.